The day I turned 25 was supposed to be a celebration of freedom, a milestone that marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of the next. I expected a cake, some thoughtful gifts, and maybe a drink or two with friends. Instead, I got a phone call that changed everything. An unexpected inheritance. My grandfather, the patriarch of our family, had passed away quietly in his sleep, leaving behind a legacy worth more than I could ever have imagined. It wasn't just the sprawling mansion in the hills, the vintage car collection, or the priceless heirlooms that caught my attention. It was his company, a $150 million business he had built from the ground up. The company that now, apparently, belonged to me. The lawyer's voice on the other end was calm, professional, but his words hit like a tidal wave. According to your grandfather's will, the majority of his estate, including his company, has been left to you. I could barely process it. A part of me felt proud, overwhelmed even, but another part of me, a part I didn't expect to feel, was terrified. When I arrived at the family estate later that day, the situation took a bizarre turn. My mother, ever the controlling presence in my life, was waiting for me with a forced smile. "I know you're excited," she said with her signature tone of maternal authority, "but there's something you need to understand." She went on to explain that despite Grandpa's wishes, she and my stepfather had already discussed things, and they had decided that my stepfather, Greg, would be taking over the company's operations. The inheritance was mine, she said. But the responsibility, the day-to-day running of the business, would fall to him. I sat there, stunned. The one thing I had been promised, a future where I could take the reins of my grandfather's empire, was slipping out of my hands before I had a chance to even hold on to it. What happened next would test my resolve, challenge everything I thought I knew about family, and force me to confront a bitter truth. Sometimes, the things we inherit are more than just wealth. They're battles we never saw coming. The following days were a blur. My mind constantly replayed my mother's words, the sheer audacity of her statement echoing in my head. Greg will run the company? I couldn't believe it. My entire life, I'd been led to believe that this was my destiny, that one day I would inherit not just the wealth, but the responsibility of continuing Grandpa's work, of carrying on the legacy he built with his own hands. But now, it felt like I was being robbed, like my future had been decided for me. When I confronted my mom about it, her response was dismissive, as if I were overreacting. "You have no experience, honey. Greg's been in business for years. You've barely even worked in the real world. He's just better equipped to handle this kind of responsibility." I felt my blood boil. Greg had no passion for the business, no emotional connection to it. He was nothing like Grandpa. He didn't care about the people, the customers, the foundation that had been built. It was all about profit for him. And yet, my mother insisted that he would be the one to keep it all together. What did I ever do to deserve this? Despite her assurances, I knew my mom had ulterior motives. She had always played the peacemaker in our family, keeping the balance between her new husband and her children from her first marriage. Greg had slid into her life with a charm I had never trusted, and now it was clear why. It wasn't just that he was her husband. He was positioning himself as the one in control. He wanted power, and I was standing in the way of that. The dynamic in the house became strained. Every time I walked into the living room, I was greeted by Greg's cold smile, a smile that seemed to say, "I've got this now." My mother would always be there, right by his side, nodding in agreement to every decision he made, offering me her placating words about family unity and support. But I saw through it all. It wasn't about unity. It was about control. And it was about Greg using my inheritance to climb the social ladder he'd always dreamed of. I didn't know who to trust anymore. My relationship with my mom, which had once been grounded in a sense of understanding and support, now felt like it was drifting away, replaced by tension and distrust. She had always been there for me, or at least I thought she had. But now, with her clear preference for Greg's leadership, I couldn't help but feel abandoned. How could she side with him over me? Was I just another pawn in her need to please her new husband? The more I thought about it, the more hurt I became. It felt like I was being erased. At the same time, there were moments when my emotions swirled with doubt. Maybe my mother was right. Maybe I wasn't ready. Grandpa had left me the company, but it wasn't like I'd spent my entire life preparing for this moment. Sure, I had an MBA and some work experience, but I hadn't run a multi-million-dollar business. Greg had years of experience in the corporate world. His resume was solid. But what he lacked, what we both lacked, was the heart and soul that Grandpa had put into the company. That wasn't something you could fake, no matter how many business degrees you had. I spent the next week trying to figure out my next move. I met with the company's management team in secret, trying to gauge their feelings, their loyalties. To my surprise, many of them didn't trust Greg either. They had all worked with Grandpa for years and knew what the company stood for. They didn't want it to become just another faceless corporation, one that prioritized profit over people. They wanted someone who understood the culture, someone who could lead with passion and integrity. But I didn't know if I was ready to step into those shoes. One evening, as I was sitting in the study, going over the documents Grandpa had left me, I heard a knock on the door. It was Lucas, one of the senior executives from the company, and my closest ally in this entire mess. He'd been Grandpa's right-hand man for as long as I could remember, and his loyalty was unquestioned. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low but carrying the weight of something important. I nodded, setting down the papers in front of me. As Lucas stepped into the room, he closed the door behind him and took a seat across from me. There was a look of concern on his face, but also something else, hope. "I know this is difficult for you," he began, "but you're not alone in this. I've spoken to some of the other managers and I can tell you they're all behind you. They want you to lead, not Greg." My heart skipped a beat. "But I don't know if I'm ready." He leaned forward, his eyes filled with sincerity. "It's not about being ready. It's about knowing what this company means. Your Grandpa's blood, his legacy. Don't let someone like Greg tear that down. You have what it takes. You just have to believe in yourself." His words hung in the air. I'd never seen Lucas so passionate before. He believed in me, even when I wasn't sure I could believe in myself. And as I looked at him, I realized something. Maybe I didn't have to do this alone. Maybe I didn't need to be a perfect CEO right now, but I could fight for what was right, for the company, for Grandpa. I wasn't just going to let Greg take this from me. The real challenge had just begun, and now it was up to me to make the next move. The days following my conversation with Lucas were a whirlwind of emotions, decisions, and behind-the-scenes maneuvering. It wasn't enough for me to simply wait and let the pieces fall into place. I had to act. If I was going to save Grandpa's company from being swallowed whole by Greg's cold, profit-driven approach, I needed to take control. But the problem wasn't just Greg. It was the foundation that had been laid between my mom, him, and the rest of the family. The longer I waited, the more complicated the situation became. I started spending long hours at the company, pushing myself through the learning curve of the day-to-day operations. Lucas had been a godsend. He'd patiently walked me through everything from financial reports to client meetings, showing me the ropes while giving me the space to make decisions. But every day I spent there, I felt the weight of my responsibilities grow heavier. I knew that to keep Grandpa's vision alive, I had to be more than just a figurehead. I had to be a leader. However, Greg wasn't making this easy. In fact, he was doing everything he could to undermine me. He started making decisions without consulting me, presenting his ideas to the board before I had a chance to voice my opinions. It was clear he was consolidating power, trying to make himself the face of the company in all but name. The board meetings became battlegrounds where I was expected to simply agree with his plans, and any opposition from me was met with derision. "Listen," Greg would say, his tone dripping with condescension. "I know you're new to this, but you need to trust me. This is how business works. You can't hold on to your grandfather's sentimental ideals forever." I wanted to scream. His words cut deep because I knew they were right in some respects. The company couldn't run on nostalgia alone. It needed to evolve. But evolving didn't mean abandoning everything Grandpa had built. It didn't mean turning it into just another soulless corporation. There was a balance that Greg was missing, a balance that my grandfather had understood. But it seemed Greg wasn't interested in finding that balance. He was only interested in increasing the bottom line. As the weeks wore on, the rift between us deepened. I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about business, about family, and about what I was willing to sacrifice to make my mark. My mother, as expected, sided with Greg at every turn. She kept telling me to let him take charge, that I didn't have what it took to handle the responsibility. The weight of her disappointment, combined with the pressure from Greg and the board, made me feel like I was being slowly suffocated. But the more they pushed, the more determined I became. I began to realize that my mom wasn't just trying to protect me. She was trying to protect her new life with Greg. I had always known that she wanted peace in the family, but now I saw the extent to which she was willing to compromise her relationship with me to maintain that peace. The worst part was, she didn't even seem to realize how much she was hurting me. I was no longer her daughter. The company, Greg, and their plans for the future had taken priority. I was just an obstacle in the way. One evening, after another tense meeting where Greg had once again steamrolled over my ideas, I found myself sitting alone in my office, staring at the photographs of Grandpa that lined the walls. I ran my fingers over one of the framed images. A picture of him standing in front of the original office building, a young man full of dreams and determination. The man in the photo had fought tooth and nail to build this company. He had poured his heart and soul into it, and now I was standing on the precipice of losing everything he had worked for. What would he have done in my shoes? I felt the weight of that question pressing on my chest. I had no easy answers, but I knew one thing. I wasn't ready to let Greg take it all from me. The company needed a leader who cared about it, the people, the values, the history, and I had to be that leader, whether I was ready or not. But to do that, I needed to step up, fight for control, and prove I wasn't going to back down just because Greg had more experience in the corporate world. That night, I made a decision. I was going to run for CEO, not in the typical corporate sense, not with the polished boardroom speeches and rehearsed strategies. I was going to prove my worth by showing the board, the employees, and Greg himself that this company was about more than just profits. It was about legacy, community, and the people who had made it what it was. I was going to lead with my heart, and if that wasn't enough, then I would fail. But at least I would fail on my own terms. The next day, I called a meeting with the board. I knew it would be a gamble, but it was the only shot I had. When I walked into the room, all eyes were on me. Greg's smirk, my mom's concerned gaze, the silent judgment of the rest of the board members. I stood at the head of the table, my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I've spent the last few weeks learning the ins and outs of this business, I began, my voice steady but firm. I've spoken to the managers, I've visited the departments, and I've listened to what the employees have to say. What I've learned is this. We are more than just a business. We are a family, and Grandpa's company is a testament to that. I'm not here to tear that down in the name of progress. I'm here to lead it into the future, by staying true to the values that made us successful in the first place. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the board members, each one a silent witness to the conflict unfolding between Greg and me. Greg, of course, wasn't impressed. His smile faltered, but he quickly recovered, ready to strike back with his usual corporate jargon. What you're proposing is reckless. Nostalgia won't pay the bills, and it won't win us market share. But I wasn't backing down. I'm proposing something that honors the past while securing the future. I want to be the CEO, but more importantly, I want this company to reflect the legacy my grandfather built. It's not just about profits, it's about purpose. The room was silent, the tension palpable. I could feel my mother's disapproval from across the table, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. This was my fight, and whether I won or lost, I was going to give everything I had. As the meeting wrapped up, I knew the battle wasn't over. But for the first time since Grandpa passed away, I felt like I had a fighting chance. The day of the shareholder meeting arrived, and with it, the final showdown. I had spent the past few days preparing, organizing my thoughts, rehearsing my speech, and rallying support. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be enough. This wasn't just about presenting facts or figures. It was about trust. Trust that I could lead. Trust that I understood the heart and soul of the company. Trust that I wasn't just another naive heir playing dress-up in my grandfather's shoes. This was the moment that would define everything. I arrived at the conference room early, pacing the floor as the clock ticked closer to the start of the meeting. My mother, as expected, had kept her distance, her neutrality apparent. She had stayed out of the public eye, preferring to be a silent observer. Greg, on the other hand, was already there, his confident smile plastered on his face as he greeted the other board members. I watched him, studying the man who had almost stolen everything from me. He was prepared, poised, and ready to take the reins in a way that was cold, calculated, and utterly devoid of empathy. As the board members filed in, I could feel the weight of their eyes on me. There was a palpable sense of tension, like an invisible wall between me and the rest of the room. No one was certain who would win, but everyone knew that one of us would walk out of this meeting in charge. The stakes had never been higher. The meeting began with the usual pleasantries, but as soon as the first agenda item was called, the election of the new CEO, the room fell silent. Greg stood up confidently, his voice smooth as he made his case for why he should be the one to lead the company. "I've spent my entire career in the corporate world," he began, his tone dripping with self-assuredness. "I've managed multi-million-dollar projects, led global teams, and built empires. I understand what it takes to scale this business to new heights, and I believe it's time to take the company in a new direction." His speech was polished, almost rehearsed, and he had all the right talking points. It was everything I had come to expect from him: logical, focused on the numbers, and devoid of any real heart. He was selling a vision that was as cold and calculated as the spreadsheets he loved to live by. But it wasn't the vision I had for the company. It wasn't the vision Grandpa had fought so hard to create. When it was my turn to speak, I felt the eyes of the room on me. I could feel the weight of my grandfather's legacy pressing down on my shoulders. But there was also a fire inside me, one that had been slowly growing stronger over the past few weeks. I wasn't going to let this moment pass me by. I wasn't going to let Greg dictate the future of something that meant so much to so many people. "I've spent my life learning about this company," I began, my voice steady but full of conviction. "And I've spent the last few weeks listening to every single employee, hearing their stories, understanding their passions. This company isn't just a business, it's a community. It's a place where people come together to build something bigger than themselves. And that's what Grandpa taught me." I paused, letting my words sink in. The room was still, the board members unsure of how to react. "We don't need to change everything to be successful," I continued. "We need to evolve, yes, but we need to do it in a way that stays true to the values that made us who we are." Profit is important, but so is people. This isn't just about the next quarter's earnings. It's about the long-term vision. And I believe I'm the one who can lead us there. Greg stood up, his face reddening with frustration as he tried to cut in. This is nonsense. You're talking about holding on to the past. We need someone who can bring in the revenue, expand our reach, and modernize this company. But I didn't back down. You don't get it, Greg, I said, my voice finally rising with emotion. This company is the past, and it's the future. We don't need to abandon what Grandpa built. We need to honor it, make it stronger, and lead it into a new era. Together. But not with your cold corporate mindset. We need a leader who believes in the people, in the heart of this company. There was a moment of silence, and then one of the senior board members who had been quiet up until that point stood up and addressed the room. I've known this company for decades, he said, and I've known both of you. But I can tell you this. Greg is a brilliant businessman, but he's not the heart of this company. He doesn't have what it takes to lead with the integrity that this company was built on. I believe in you, he said, turning to me. You've shown us that you understand what this company truly stands for, and I think it's time we had a leader who believes in its legacy. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room, and one by one the board members began to speak up, voicing their support for me. Greg's face twisted with anger, but he didn't speak. The room was turning. The tide was shifting in my favor. In the end, it wasn't just my words that had won them over. It was the conviction behind them, the passion I had shown for the people who made the company what it was. It was clear that I had earned their respect. As the vote was called, I held my breath. The final tally was close, but it was clear. I had won. I had fought for Grandpa's legacy, and I had won the right to lead. As the meeting adjourned, I stood there, overwhelmed by the rush of emotions. But one thing was clear. The battle wasn't over. The real work was just beginning. The future of the company was in my hands now, and it was up to me to guide it forward, with the heart, passion, and integrity it deserved. In the days following, the board's decision, the air around the office felt lighter, more optimistic. It was as if the heavy cloud of uncertainty that had hung over the company for weeks had finally lifted. The first few moments after the vote had been a blur. Congratulations from employees, supportive messages from some of the managers, and, of course, Greg's cold, silent retreat. But in the midst of it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just stepping into a new role. I was inheriting something far more important than just a company. I was inheriting a legacy, a promise that I would not let fall by the wayside. The first thing I did after the meeting was call a company-wide town hall. I needed to speak directly to the employees, to show them that the future was one we were going to build together, not with the cold, distant approach Greg had wanted, but with heart, integrity, and transparency. I wanted to restore faith in the company, especially after the tensions of the past few months. The meeting was held in the main conference hall. As I stood at the front, looking out at the faces of the people who had helped build this company from the ground up, I could feel the weight of responsibility bearing down on me. These people were more than just employees. They were family. They were the backbone of everything Grandpa had created, and it was up to me to honor that legacy. I know the past few weeks have been difficult, I began, my voice steady but sincere. There has been uncertainty, tension, and I'm sure some of you have felt that your voices weren't being heard. But today, that changes. I am committed to listening to each and every one of you, to making decisions that benefit not just the bottom line, but the people who make this company what it is. There was a soft murmur of approval, but I could see in their eyes that many were still unsure. Trust, after all, wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. We're going to take the time to reevaluate our values, our mission, I continued. And we're going to move forward as a team. My grandfather's vision for this company wasn't about profit above all else. It was about building something sustainable, something that could stand the test of time. That's what we'll focus on. Not just what's in the next quarter's report, but what will last for the next generation. The response was positive, but it wasn't the cheers I was looking for that mattered. It was the change in the atmosphere. For the first time in a long while, there was hope. People felt like their voices could be heard again. The employees, the management, even the quiet ones in the back row, all nodded, their faces lighting up with a cautious optimism. Over the next few weeks, things began to change. I called more meetings, both formal and informal, with the leadership team. I sought input from managers who had been with the company for years, and I started to implement ideas from the ground up. Slowly but surely, I began to see the difference. The culture of the company was shifting. It was moving away from the sterile, profit-first mentality that Greg had tried to instill, and back toward a focus on people, quality, and community. But the process wasn't without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, moments where I questioned whether I was really up to the task. Greg, of course, didn't make things any easier. He had retreated from the company, but his presence still loomed large. He would occasionally send emails to the board, questioning my decisions, undermining my leadership with veiled criticisms. I had to remind myself that this wasn't just about winning the vote. It was about proving that I could lead, proving that I could make this company better, even without his help. One evening, as I was wrapping up another long day at the office, I received a phone call from my mother. She wanted to meet. I was hesitant at first, unsure of what to expect. Our relationship had been strained in the aftermath of the battle for the company. I couldn't ignore the fact that her loyalty was still tied to Greg, and the wound from her decision to side with him had not healed. But she was still my mother, and I knew that we needed to talk. We met at a small cafe near the office. I arrived first, sitting at a table in the corner, waiting for her to arrive. When she walked in, her face was somber, but there was something different in her eyes, a quiet regret, maybe even a hint of apology. She sat down across from me, her hands folded in front of her. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened," she began, her voice soft. "And I realize now that I wasn't fair to you. I was trying to keep the peace, to make sure that Greg felt like he belonged, but I didn't see how much it hurt you. You were right. This company was never just about making money. It was about something more, and I see that now." I felt a lump form in my throat. "I don't need you to apologize, Mom. I need you to understand why this mattered so much to me. Grandpa built this company from nothing, and I didn't want it to be something else, something that lost everything he worked for. I didn't want to lose him. Not like that." She reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "I know, and I'm proud of you. I may have been wrong in how I handled things, but I believe in you now. I see the work you're doing, the change you're making. You're leading this company with heart, and that's what Grandpa would have wanted." I squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of everything finally starting to lift. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had my mother back. Not as an ally to Greg, but as my mother, someone who was proud of the person I was becoming. The road ahead was still long, and there would be challenges to face. Greg might not be out of the picture entirely, and the company would continue to evolve. But I knew now, more than ever, that I wasn't alone in this fight. I had the support of the employees, of my grandfather's legacy, and most importantly, I had the conviction to do what was right. As I sat there, surrounded by the flickering lights of the cafe, I realized that the real work had just begun. But for the first time, I was ready for it. And I knew deep down that Grandpa would be proud of what I was about to accomplish. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the company slowly but surely began to transform. The changes I had set into motion weren't always easy, but they were real. Employees felt heard again, and the focus shifted from short-term profits to long-term goals, grounded in the values Grandpa had instilled. We found new ways to innovate, to grow, but never at the cost of the things that mattered most: integrity, people, and purpose. Greg's presence in the company became a distant memory, a ghost of a past that no longer had a place. My relationship, with my mother too, began to heal, though the scars would always remain. She had supported me when it mattered most, and I realized that, in her own way, she had always wanted what was best for me, even if she didn't always know how to express it. Sitting in the office one late evening, I looked out over the city skyline, my grandfather's picture still hanging proudly on the wall. The company had found its footing again, and I had found my place in it, not just as the heir, but as a leader. I wasn't perfect, but I was true to myself, and that was enough. As I closed my eyes and let the weight of everything settle, I couldn't help but smile. I had fought for what mattered, and I had won. Grandpa's legacy was safe, not just because I inherited it, but because I truly understood what it meant to lead with heart. And as I walked out of the office that night, I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready.